I was 9 years old the summer my parents took me to that traveling circus outside Daytona Beach. Back then, the world still felt big, in a good way. Nights were warm, thunderstorms were exciting, and the scary things in life were supposed to stay on TV screens or in stories whispered by older kids pretending to be brave. But that summer, something followed me home from the circus. And for years after, I learned that some things don't stay on the fairgrounds. They come with you. The circus set up behind an abandoned strip mall that had been decaying for years. The asphalt was cracked and split by tall weeds like green knives. Everything smelled like damp earth and gasoline, mixed with the faint sweetness of funnel cake drifting from somewhere inside the tents. I remember it was around 7 p.m. The sky was turning purple, the kind of twilight where the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. As we crossed the parking lot, I noticed something immediately. There were no other kids, just adults, barely talking, walking slowly, their faces strangely blank as they moved toward the main tent. At 9 years old, I didn't have the words for it, but something about the atmosphere felt off, like the air was thicker than it should have been. My mother squeezed my hand and said, "See? Not too crowded. Perfect." But even she sounded uncertain. Before we reached the ticket booth, I saw him, the clown. He stood next to a faded metal balloon cart with chipped blue paint. Balloons of every color were tied to messy strings, drifting slightly in the humid breeze. But the clown wasn't moving. Not at all. His outfit was old-fashioned baggy striped pants, a yellowed ruffled collar, oversized shoes. But what stood out most was the mask. It wasn't a typical clown face. It was porcelain. White, glossy, cracked in thin lines, like a spider web. The smile painted on it was too wide, like it had been carved rather than drawn. And the eyes, they were just two perfectly round holes. Dark, empty. He stood perfectly upright, arms at his sides, his head tilted just enough to make the mask's fixed smile seem directed at me. And he wasn't blinking. Not once. Of course, as a kid, I rationalized it away. It's a mask, I told myself. Of course he can't blink. But then, when my dad asked him, "How much for a balloon?" the clown didn't answer. He didn't even turn. Just stared straight at me. My dad looked annoyed and waved a hand in front of him. "Hey, buddy." Still nothing. My mother laughed nervously. Maybe he's on break? But the clown's head ever so slowly tilted an inch further, and the hollow eye holes lined up directly with mine. My chest felt tight. I tugged at my mom's arm. "Can we go inside, please?" She looked at me like she didn't understand why I was afraid, but after a moment, she nodded. We walked away. And that was the first time I felt it, that sensation of being followed, even when my back was turned. I didn't look behind me. I couldn't. The main circus tent was huge, striped red and gold, rising like a dome over the gravel lot. Inside, everything smelled like sawdust, sweat, and old fabric. The lights felt too dim, like the bulbs were coated in dust no one had bothered to wipe away. I kept glancing toward the entrance, expecting to see the clown, but he never came inside. At least, not yet. While we waited for the show to begin, I felt this strange pressure, like someone was staring at me. I turned around again and again, scanning the rows of people. But every time, the same thing happened. I'd look away from one direction, and when I looked back, someone new would be sitting in that direction, closer than before. Not adults. Not kids. These were performers, I think. Faces painted white. Smudged makeup, dark circles around their eyes, as if they hadn't slept in days. And they all sat extremely still. I tried to ignore them, but the feeling kept coming back, the sensation that someone was waiting for me to look away again. The show started with blaring trumpets and the ringmaster stepping into the spotlight. He looked traditional, tall hat, red coat, thin mustache, but the way he smiled didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like a warning wrapped in politeness. "Tonight," he announced, "we have a special performance from our silent clown." The crowd clapped politely, but my stomach dropped. "The one and only," the ringmaster continued, stretching out the words like taffy, "Harlequin Nocturnus." The spotlight snapped to the center of the ring, and there he was, the clown. But the mask was gone. At first, the crowd gasped. Someone laughed nervously. I froze. His real face looked exactly like the mask. Not similar, not reminiscent. Identical. Same glossy white sheen. Same cracked lines like dried porcelain. Same painted-on smile. Even the dark circles where eyes should have been hollow bowls of shadow were exactly the same shape as the mask's eye holes. Except now, there were actual eyes inside them. Small, pale gray eyes that didn't blink. Not even once. The clown didn't bow, didn't move, didn't react to the applause. He just raised one thin arm and pointed directly at me. The spotlight followed his hand as if on command, illuminating my small face among hundreds of people. My heart hammered so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. My mom whispered, "Honey, it's okay. He's just including you in the show." But even she didn't sound convinced. The clown kept pointing. For too long. Longer than any performer should hold an audience interaction. A minute. 2. I don't know. I couldn't breathe. When he finally lowered his arm, he didn't stop watching me. Not even when other performers entered the ring. Not even when the lights changed. Not even when the crowd shifted their attention. His head never broke from its angle. His eyes never blinked. It felt like he was waiting for me to blink first. Or maybe for me to look away. But I didn't dare. Halfway through the show, something went wrong. The acrobats were flipping from one trapeze to another when all the lights suddenly cut out. The generators outside sputtered. The tent plunged into darkness. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed like it was a joke. But then, in the pitch black, a single sound echoed, tap, 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 footsteps. Slow, measured. Approaching the stands, I squeezed my mom's hand hard. I could feel her trying not to panic. A dim emergency bulb flickered on. Barely enough to see. Enough to see the clown standing in the aisle. Just 2 rows away from me. His neck was bent at an unnatural angle, like his head was slowly tipping toward his shoulder. His chest rose and fell irregularly, like he was trying to remember how to breathe. And then he blinked, just once. A single, slow, sticky blink like his eyelids were too heavy, or like they were peeling apart after being sealed shut. It was the only time I ever saw him blink. When the lights returned fully, he was gone, not walking away, not exiting the tent, just gone. The ringmaster hurried back out, apologizing, insisting the show would continue. But no one around me seemed bothered. No one whispered about the clown suddenly being in the aisles. It was like no one had seen him but me. I begged my parents to leave before the show ended. I don't remember what excuse I used. I just remember my voice breaking, tears already on my cheeks. My father sighed and stood up. My mother wrapped her arm around me and told me to breathe. We left the tent through the side exit, and the night air hit me like cold water. But the relief didn't last. As we walked across the dark lot toward our car, I looked to the left toward a broken street lamp buzzing weakly, and there he was, the clown, standing perfectly still under the light, mask back on, head tilted just slightly toward me, arm raised, pointing, still not blinking, not even once. As we drove away from the circus that night, I remember pressing myself against the car door as tightly as possible, as if any bit of space around me could become a place that thing might slip into. My father switched on the headlights, and the beams stretched across the uneven grass, catching small glimpses of performers still scattered around the grounds. They weren't packing up, or talking, or even moving. They were just standing there, perfectly still, like forgotten mannequins waiting for instructions. But none of them frightened me, as much as the one beneath the broken street lamp, the clown. His mask gleamed slightly under the flickering light, head tilted at the same unnatural angle, that same impossible stare fixed directly on me. And even as our car rolled forward, as distance stretched between us, I had the sickening feeling that something inside him was leaning closer, as if he were somehow following without moving at all. When we pulled onto the road, the street lamp finally disappeared from view, swallowed by the dark shapes of overgrown bushes. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was changing behind us, something shifting, something stepping forward now that we couldn't see it anymore. At home, my parents chalked my fear up to exhaustion and overstimulation. They tucked me into bed, told me I had nothing to worry about, and once the hallway light turned off, the house became too silent. Not the comfort silence I was used to, but a heavy, listening kind of quiet, like the kind that settles right before a thunderstorm. I lay awake for what felt like hours, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, trying to convince myself that everything I'd seen was just some strange circus magic. But then, sometime after midnight, I heard the first sound, a soft tap against my bedroom window, then another, slow, spaced out, almost polite. I froze. Our house was one story, and my window sat only 4 feet above the ground. Anything, anyone, could stand there easily. I clenched my eyes shut, hoping it was just a tree branch, but there were no trees outside that wall, just gravel. The tapping stopped. I listened so hard my ears hurt. For a moment, nothing. Then breathing, not loud, but close, too close, like someone was standing only inches away from the glass, exhaling slow, shaky breaths that fogged up the pain. I pulled the covers up to my face, leaving only a slit to breathe through. I didn't want to look, but the fear of not knowing eventually became worse than the fear of seeing. So I slowly turned my head toward the window. The curtain was thin. The street light from outside created just enough illumination to outline shapes on the other side, and that's when I saw it, the silhouette of a head. Tilted, motionless, too tall to be my father, too narrow to be my mother, and the shoulders, those slumped, exaggerated shoulders that belonged to only one figure I'd seen that night. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Then the silhouette shifted, just slightly, as if it were angling its face to peer in more closely. I squeezed my eyes shut again, but the shape remained burned into my vision. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I don't know. But eventually, the breathing faded, the shadow withdrew, and the room fell silent once more. When morning came, I didn't tell my parents what happened. I couldn't. I knew how it sounded. Instead, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, some leftover fear reshaping shadows into monsters. But when I stepped outside later that day to get my bike, I froze. In the thin layer of dew on the gravel beneath my window were footprints, large, uneven footprints, and next to them, a small cluster of perfect round impressions, like the ends of oversized clown shoes. That night wasn't a nightmare. It was a beginning. For the rest of that day, I tried convincing myself that what I'd seen on the gravel wasn't real, that the prints were just oddly shaped impressions from a raccoon, or maybe my father's boots distorted by the dew. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something had stood outside my window the night before, something that breathed too slowly, stood too still, and stared too long, and it wasn't finished with me. That night, I begged my parents to let me sleep in their room, but they brushed it off gently, telling me I was too old for that nightmares only had as much power as I gave them. They had no idea that what scared me wasn't a dream. Nightmares don't leave footprints. I tried to stay awake after they put me to bed, keeping the lamp on and my eyes fixed on the doorway. But at some point, exhaustion pulled me under. And when I woke again, the lamp was off. I didn't turn it off. The room was swallowed in darkness so complete that I couldn't see the outline of my own hands. At first, I thought the power had gone out until I noticed the faint orange glow bleeding into the room from under the door hallway light. That meant the lamp wasn't off because of a power outage. It was off because someone had switched it off. Slowly, deliberately. I lay perfectly still, listening. And there it was again, breathing. Not outside the window this time. Not muffled by glass. Inside, in my room. I felt the air change first, the way the atmosphere compresses slightly when someone tall is standing close by. The breathing came from the corner next to my dresser, a heavy, uneven rhythm like old lungs struggling to keep pace. I turned onto my side an inch at a time, terrified the mattress would creak, terrified the breathing would stop, not because silence brought safety, but because silence meant movement. When my eyes adjusted enough to distinguish the darkest parts of the darkness, I saw him. A silhouette taller than the dresser, shoulders hunched, head tilted at that unnatural angle that made his mask look like it was listening to something only he could hear. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up like it had been filled with cement. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure slowly leaned forward, and in the faint orange strip of light under the door, I saw the bottom of the porcelain mask catch just enough light to glint. He was wearing it again, and he was closer than he had ever been. His breathing grew louder, as though each exhale was a deliberate effort. For a moment, he didn't move at all, and I wondered if he was waiting for me to scream, or blink, or run. Then his hand lifted, slowly, shakily, and he pointed at me. The exact same gesture he had used inside the circus tent. Only now the arm trembled, as though holding its own weight was difficult or unnatural. His finger didn't waver from me as he took one silent step forward, then another. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he wasn't the type of monster that moved when you weren't looking. The breathing grew louder, so loud I could feel it against my face, cold and damp. I opened my eyes again, just a slit, and saw the mask only inches from mine. The eyes behind it, those pale, unblinking discs, stared directly into me. I don't know how long he stayed there. It could have been seconds or hours. But then, abruptly, the hallway light flicked off. My father was going to bed, and in that exact moment, the clown straightened up with a crack, his spine bending into place like something being forced back into a box. The room went pitch black. I heard one slow step backward, then another, then nothing. When I dared to turn on my lamp again, gasping, the room was empty. But near my bed, just next to where his feet had been, was something lying on the carpet, a balloon string, red and frayed. At the end of it was no balloon, just a small, cracked piece of porcelain. A shard from his mask. The next day, I showed it to my parents. They told me it was part of a toy, or something from the garage, or maybe something I picked up at the circus without remembering. But they were wrong. I knew exactly where it came from, because when I held the shard under the light, I could see something tiny carved into the inside surface. A single handwritten word, a name. Nocturnus. For days after I found the shard, I lived inside a fog of dread so thick it felt impossible to breathe normally again. I jumped at every sound, every shadow, every shift in the air. I avoided my own bedroom, pretending to do homework in the living room, until my parents insisted I go to sleep. They still didn't believe anything was wrong. That made it worse. Because I knew if Nocturnus came back and I screamed, they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't see him. They hadn't seen the circus performers standing still in the dark. They hadn't seen him in the tent, staring only at me. They hadn't seen him outside the window or in my room. They didn't know he didn't have to knock to get in. The thing that kept me awake every night wasn't just the fear of him returning, it was the growing certainty that he had never left. The house always felt wrong now. Like he was inside the walls, behind the doors, in the attic, waiting. I tried to stay awake as long as I could, but on the fourth night, exhaustion won. I don't know what time it was when I woke to the sound of whispering. Not talking, whispering. Not words, just the dry, hushed scrape of breath sliding through teeth. I sat up slowly, trembling, and realized the whispering wasn't in my room. It was in the hallway, right outside my door. The doorknob rattled gently, once, then again, like someone was testing it, checking if it was locked. I backed against the headboard, choking on air. The doorknob stopped. Silence. Then, the slow, deliberate creak of the door opening. It wasn't locked. A tall, thin shadow stretched across the floor before I saw him. Nocturnus stepped inside with that unnatural stiffness, his head tilting first, his shoulders following a second later, the rest of his body moving like it was attached by strings pulled by invisible hands. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. I couldn't move. His mask gleamed faintly in the moonlight, slipping through the blinds. Except, tonight, something was different. The mask had a new crack, running from the eye hole to the jaw, as if it had been splitting wider every time he appeared. Through that crack, I glimpsed a sliver of skin beneath pale, stretched, pulsing slightly. Alive. Nocturnus moved closer, each step impossibly silent. When he reached the side of my bed, he lowered himself with disturbing slowness, crouching until his face was inches from mine. His breathing rattled, broken and uneven. Then, for the first time since the circus, he spoke. His voice didn't sound like a person's. It sounded like something imitating a person from memory, like words being formed by lungs that didn't belong to the living. "I saw you," he whispered. "You looked at me." I shook my head violently, but he leaned in closer until his mask touched my forehead. "You blinked," he hissed. "I didn't. I tried to scream, but nothing came out." His hand rose slowly, fingers trembling, and he tapped my chest with one cold fingertip. "You're marked," he breathed. "You belong to the night show now." Then the lights in the house flickered. A buzzing surge ran through the walls, like the power grid was choking. Every bulb went white-hot for a split second, then burst. Glass shattered. The house plunged into darkness. In that moment, something shifted behind me. My bed dipped, as though someone or something had climbed onto it. Nocturnus straightened his posture with a jerking motion, his mask splitting with a tiny crack as he turned his head sharper than any human neck should allow. "They're here," he whispered. The audience. My blood turned to ice. From the corners of the room, faint shapes began to form white faces, painted grins, hollow eyes, all of them performers from the circus. all of them motionless, watching, waiting. Nocturnus raised one hand as if conducting an unseen orchestra, and the shapes leaned closer, bending and twisting in unnatural silence. I don't remember anything after that. I must have passed out from terror. When I woke up, sunlight poured through my window. My room was completely empty. My parents burst in the moment they heard me yell, insisting nothing had happened, that I must have had a night terror. There was no broken glass, no footprints, no figures. Nocturnus was gone. But something had changed, because as they pulled me into a comforting hug, I saw something behind them on the wall. A shadow, tilted, unmoving, watching. Nocturnus wasn't finished. In the years that followed, I saw him less often, but never, not at all. Sometimes a reflection in a store window behind me. Sometimes a figure standing under a flickering street lamp at the end of my street. Sometimes a tall shape in my hallway when I walked to the bathroom at night and pretended I hadn't seen it. He never rushed, never attacked, never chased. He didn't have to. He only watched. And he never blinked. Even now, 2 decades later, I still find small cracks of porcelain near my doorstep or tied to a stray balloon string caught on my fence. A reminder, a promise, a warning. I've learned something since then. Something important. The circus never leaves town. It follows the chosen. And the performers don't blink. Because blinking means looking away. Looking away means missing the moment the night show begins. And for people like me, people who look back, the show never really ends.